I don't think this is a surprise to anyone, but Adobe products are really expensive. The assumption is that it's used by professionals, but I'm no professional. I mean, just look at my content. I'm just an ordinary person trying his best. Speaking of ordinary people, it's kind of a given that character needs something special to stand out, especially in something like a gacha where you can have hundreds of characters. Unfortunately, this often means that the opposite kind of character gets forgotten about. There's no reason to make a simple character, so simple characters are basically never intentionally made. As an example, let's look at not Arknights. You have a few normalish characters like Hook, Gwenipin, Natasha, but you also have sword masters, mad scientists, super soldiers, celebrities, immortals, child prodigies, scholars, upper management, super hackers, mind controllers, tax collectors, whatever the world's sparkle is, and characters who are quite literally blessed by the gods themselves, i.e. gamblers. I know half of those sound like a joke, but I swear in context they're really powerful people. Just take my word for it if you don't play HSR. I should probably mention that for Star Rail, this works because the whole point of Star Rail is to go on a grand adventure beyond your wildest dreams, so the fact that everyone's fantastical like this is perfectly normal. HSR, like the other Hoyo games, are character first, so the fact that these characters stand out is kind of the point, right? You're gotching for these characters. Characters need to be interesting, to be desired. So how does this apply to Arknights? To start off, I'm not saying that any of these characters are inherently boring, but in the scope of everything that exists in Terra, they're pretty simple. You know, people doing their jobs or whatnot. As a recent example, let's look at Ray. She is a pit sinker, which basically means she goes into the mines to make sure everything's okay before the miners start mining. Unfortunately, this isn't really an important job. In fact, it's said that even children can get this job. All you really need to do is to know how to not die. And on top of that, it's one of the jobs that's getting outdone by automation, so yeah, it's kinda pointless now. The only real upside is that she's pretty good at not dying, namely it's because she's been fighting deep in caves, in the dark, on her own for so long, she's just kinda used to it. In the end, she joins Rhodes Island because, what else is she gonna do? She doesn't really have a stable job anymore. If you've read Grinning Valley, this is basically what the event is about. They never even make it to the titular Grinning Valley because making it there was never the point. It was always about Ray figuring out what the hell she is doing with her life. As for other simple 6 stars, Golden Glow's an obvious choice, being just a hairdresser that got her store burned down. And then Lumen, who, yeah, is tied to the greater story of Iberia, but really is just a guy who's at the right place at the right time. There aren't that many 6 stars out there that are just ordinary people who have ordinary backgrounds. Everyone is related to some plot in some way. As an example, we have sword masters, mad scientists, super soldiers. Okay, but wait. If Lumen was involved in the Stultifair Navis, can he really still be considered an ordinary person? It was a pretty major event after all, you know, ties of the Seaborn and Aegir and all that. Well, I'd argue yes. After all, how a character acts after joining your account does affect how people see them. And Lumen's files even mention how one of his main appeals is the fact that he's very ordinary. The best representation we can get of these characters is as operators in-game, because that's where they're most neutral, where they're not affected by whatever is happening in the story. And yet, it isn't exactly canon. I mean, just look at Hibiscus and Hibiscus, or any altar, really. But that'd still be the most updated version of any operator we've got. Like, unless they show up in story again, we have nothing on some characters. I mean, just look at Matomaru. Do you remember Matomaru? Being a live service game, Arknights has to keep pushing forward, but then a lot of characters get left in the dust like this. Look at Pallas, used to be an important person. High Priestess, Goddess of Victory, all that stuff. Now she's just someone at Rhodes getting treatment and getting drunk. Her story hints about going back to Minos to reform it, and to have them be more accepting of infected, but until Arknights gives us that, that's where she is. She's no more than just another person at Rhodes. On the other hand, you have people like Scotty, who's always wrapped up in business even in-game, always fretting about the big stuff. And then there's Calcete, who's so important that she appears not only everywhere, but she also transcends the game itself.
Can you talk?
Of course, that's only talking about the big people. There's a whole class of characters that I haven't even touched. It's the largest group in Arknights by far, and they shine in how diverse they can be. I, of course, am talking about 5 stars. Now, obviously, not all 5 stars are normal people. By design, they encompass a large variety of roles and whatnot. For every Bryophyta, there's a Yera. For every April, there's a Latesy. For every Amiya, there's a Kirara. Oddly enough, 1 stars are either tied to other characters, collabs, or literal April Fool's jokes. 2 and 3 stars are solidified as the core of Rhodes Island and thus have a pretty concrete narrative placement. When they show up in story outside of their own oprecs, it's usually because they represent Rhodes Island and not because they have a reason themselves to be there. Think Catapult and Loose and Arrowhead, for example. 4 stars are where characters start to show a lot more individuality, namely because they're not required to be a part of Rhodes. They're given more flexibility to just be people from wherever doing whatever. Tadara is a far-sighted mercenary, Indigo is a ditzy ex-lighthouse keeper, Perfumer is a perfumer, and Quartz is just unremarkable. It's because they're not really tied to any stories that they are allowed to, or arguably required to, be themselves, with things like operator records being about their own experiences and feelings. Of course, 5 and 6 stars also have oprecs about themselves, but because there's usually context to who they are and what they're doing, there's always a bit of influence from events and whatnot. Take Quartz for example. When I said she was unremarkable, I meant it. That's her defining character trait. And because she's so unremarkable, she gets a whole story by exploring the nuances of simply passing the time. Now compare that to Punsaris, an unassuming character barely in the event she came from. Yet, her oprec happens right after the event as if it's a continuation, not only giving the usual character development, but also showing how Siesta has changed in the little time between then and now. It's not a big change, obviously, it was like 2 days or something. But because most of what Punsaris learned about Siesta is through her grandfather, she ends up being a look into how Siesta used to be. This kind of quiet world building where we learn about how things are like without any major events is very much appreciated. You don't often get this with 4 stars. That isn't to say Punsaris is the norm for 5 stars, but more so the middle ground. On one extreme, you have characters like Fire Whistle and Melonite who frankly are just there to fill the banner, and on the other you have characters like Delphine and Tantala who are rather important, though with the story relevant 5 stars, it sometimes comes across as they don't actually do that much, but I'd argue that's more so just because they need to share the screen time with other characters, like 6 stars. Delphine ends up being narratively close to Siege, who also needs to share time with Horn and Stainless, so you could make this argument about Glassglow and Brockrock too. In the end, most 5 stars help build the world in their own unique ways, and I really appreciate how Hypergrip has made that pool so diverse. Of course, this video was meant to highlight the less mentioned characters, so I'm going to stop this section here before I go on for another 5 minutes. Build your 5 stars. Even if they're not that good, build your 5 stars. Let's close this off with a question. What is the story of Arknights? If we want to be really specific, then it's just the main story. But then, are events part of the story? I imagine most people would still say yes, events do count as Arknights' story because they tie in with Arknights' narrative and are kind of why you're playing the game anyways. If we had a main story chapter for every event, we'd be in like chapter 40 something at this point. Okay, one more step outwards. Are operator files part of story? I mean, they're in the game, you can read them, and they're tied to the characters that you used to play, so why not? The voice lines are on the same boat here. Last one. Is the Annihilation map a part of the story? For those who don't know, when I say Annihilation map, I'm referring to the map that the Annihilation screens are on, you know, the menu where you do those missions. To those just playing the game, this map doesn't matter, but we don't have a canon map otherwise, do we? So, is the information we glean from this map a part of the story? And if we really want to overextend, what about audio synesthesia, and the official trailers, and the merch, and the official live streams? I wanted to make this video on ordinary characters because I want to show off how important these characters can be towards world building. Yes, Arknights has main story and plenty of interesting side stories, but it's not just those, it's the thousands of little things as well. The reason I like ordinary characters is that when the line between them and NPCs is kind of blurry, the general power scale gets set to around that level, which in turn makes everything feel just a bit more realistic. While it's always exciting to experience crazy and wild adventures, part of the magic with the Arknights is just how grounded it is. Half of the operators are basically randomly picked people who just happen to cross paths with roads. And while they're all special in their own little ways, it really does feel like they have to work together to get things done. Because of that, it's really thrilling when you get to see these characters do the one thing they're good at. A single Arknights character might be less interesting than a single character from any other gacha, but it's that individuality of 300 or so operators that makes one strong collective. Alone, they are Asgen, Meteorite, Hodor, Click. Together, they're Rhodes Island.
Take a pick, either path is reckless. All talk and never answers. All talk and never answers. All talk and never answers.